The $3 Clara Mae Dawson counted in her worn leather purse would not buy her passage from Cheyenne, nor would it secure lodging as the station prepared to close against the approaching blizzard. 6 months since fleeing Boston in disgrace, her nursing credentials worthless after the scandal. The familiar weight of her medical bag, the one thing she couldn't bear to sell, pressed against her side. Outside, Wyoming Territory's January fury painted the windows white with snow and promised death to those caught without shelter. When a child slipped on the station floor, Clara's hands moved automatically, tending the bloodied knee with practiced precision. "Thank you, nurse," the mother said, and Clara flinched at the title. If anyone here discovered who she really was, what she had done, even the blizzard would seem a kinder fate. As the last travelers hurried out, a tall figure appeared at the station door, snow swirling around his imposing frame. Millionaire rancher Silas Boone's gaze settled on Clara, changing both their destinies forever. The $3 Clara Mae Dawson counted in her worn leather purse would not buy her passage from Cheyenne, nor would it secure lodging as the station prepared to close against the approaching blizzard. She tucked the coins away with practiced economy, her gloved fingers stiff with cold, despite the station's meager heat. "Last train's gone, ma'am," the station agent called, his voice echoing through the emptying room. "Won't be another till the storm passes. 2 days at least." Clara nodded, keeping her face carefully neutral despite the panic rising in her chest. 6 months since fleeing Boston in disgrace, her nursing credentials worthless after the scandal. Each town had offered shorter refuge than the last, as rumors somehow found her. Now Wyoming Territory's vast emptiness, which had promised anonymity, threatened to become her tomb. The familiar weight of her medical bag, the one thing she couldn't bear to sell, pressed against her side. Inside lay instruments of a profession she no longer had the right to practice, according to the Boston Medical Board. Yet her fingers still itched to heal, her mind still catalogued symptoms and treatments reflexively. A child's cry pierced the silence as a young boy slipped on melting snow tracked across the wooden floor. Blood bloomed on his knee, and Clara moved without thinking, kneeling beside him. "Let me help," she said softly, opening her bag with practiced hands. The mother hesitated only briefly before nodding. Clara cleaned the wound with gentle efficiency, applying iodine and a neat bandage while distracting the boy with questions about his journey. His tears stopped, replaced by curious observation of her skilled movements. "Thank you, nurse," the mother said gratefully. Clara flinched at the title. If anyone discovered who she really was, what she had done, even the blizzard would seem a kinder fate. "Station's closing, folks," the agent announced, jangling his keys. "Storm's nearly here." The remaining travelers hurried out, leaving Clara alone with her impossible choices. Through the frosted windows, she watched families being met by waiting carriages, hotels already displaying "no vacancy" signs illuminated by gas lamps. She pulled her threadbare coat tighter and stepped onto the platform. The wind hit like a physical blow, stealing her breath. Snow swirled in hypnotic patterns under the station lamps, beautiful and deadly. Clara calculated her odds with clinical detachment. Exposed to these temperatures, unconsciousness would claim her within 2 hours, death shortly after. The platform emptied quickly, leaving her alone with the howling wind. Clara closed her eyes, exhaustion tempting her to simply surrender, a sensible end to a ruined life. "Miss, are you waiting for someone?" The deep voice startled her. A tall figure stood before her, snow-dusting broad shoulders and an expensive wool coat. His face, partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, showed concern rather than the judgment she'd grown accustomed to. "No," Clara answered simply. "There's no one." He studied her with intelligent eyes, taking in her medical bag and thin coat. "I'm Silas Boone. My ranch is an hour's ride from here. I have room if you need shelter until the storm passes." Every warning bell rang in Clara's mind. Women alone didn't accept invitations from strange men, no matter how respectably dressed. Yet death waited in the gathering storm with far more certainty. "I couldn't impose," she said reflexively. "It's no imposition when the alternative is freezing to death." He gestured toward an impressive sleigh where a driver huddled beneath buffalo robes. "I'll be returning to town once the road's clear." "You're welcome to return then, or continue your journey." Clara weighed her dwindling options with pragmatic speed. "That's very kind, Mr. Boone." "Not kindness, miss, just common decency." He offered his arm. "And your name?" She hesitated only briefly. Clara May Dawson." The sleigh cut through deepening snow, the powerful horses snorting clouds of steam as they pulled away from Cheyenne's dimming lights. Clara sat stiffly beside Silas Boone, accepting the offered buffalo robe with murmured thanks. The driver hunched forward, focused on navigating the increasingly treacherous road. "What brings you to Wyoming territory, Miss Dawson?" Silas asked, his voice carrying easily despite the wind. Clara had prepared this answer months ago. "I'm seeking new opportunities. The East has become crowded. Most who come here are running toward something or away from something," he observed without judgment. "The territory doesn't much care which it is." The simplicity of this frontier philosophy startled her. "And you, Mr. Boone, what brought you here?" "Cattle, initially. Land was cheap 15 years ago. His profile was strong against the darkening sky. Now I run the largest ranch in the county, 20,000 acres, 200 head of cattle, and 40 men who depend on me for their livelihood." Clara recognized the quiet pride of a self-made man. From the quality of his clothing and sleigh, his success was evident. "Driver," Silas called suddenly. "Any news from Cheyenne about that medical scandal back east? My sister mentioned reading something in last month's Harper's." Clara's blood froze, her fingers tightening imperceptibly on her medical bag. The driver's response was lost to the wind, but Silas seemed to lose interest in the topic. "We'll be there soon," he said, nodding toward distant lights appearing through the snow. Not much to look at compared to Boston or New York, but Boone Ranch has never let anyone freeze yet. Clara stared at the approaching lights, wondering if she'd exchanged one danger for another, far worse. The Boone Ranch emerged from the blizzard like a fortress against the wilderness, a sprawling 2-story main house with warm light spilling from windows, flanked by well-built barns and bunkhouses. As the sleigh approached, Clara noted the impressive scope of the operation: corrals, stables, smokehouse, and what appeared to be a small blacksmith's shop. Silas helped her from the sleigh, her frozen limbs protesting the movement. The wind cut through her inadequate coat, making her grateful for the shelter looming before them. "Mrs. Wilson!" Silas called as they entered the main house. The warmth hit Clara like a physical force, thawing her numbed cheeks painfully. A stout woman with graying hair appeared, wiping flour-dusted hands on her apron. "Mr. Boone, we weren't expecting you back in this weather." Her eyes found Clara, curious but not unkind. "Mrs. Wilson, this is Miss Dawson. She was stranded at the station. She'll be staying until the road's clear." "Of course." Mrs. Wilson nodded. "I'll prepare the guest room." "Thank you." Silas turned to Clara. "Mrs. Wilson is my housekeeper. Been with us since before my parents passed." Clara clutched her medical bag, suddenly conscious of her bedraggled appearance in this well-appointed home. Polished woodwork, quality furnishings, and the subtle touches of wealth surrounded her. "You'll stay in the guest room tonight," Silas said, removing his coat. "Tomorrow we'll discuss arrangements." Before Clara could respond, hurried footsteps sounded on the stairs. "Mr. Boone!" A young ranch hand appeared, face tight with worry. "It's Miss Emma. Her fever's worsened." Silas's expression transformed instantly from cordial host to concerned brother. "When?" "Started climbing an hour ago, sir. Nothing Mrs. Wilson tried has helped." Clara's medical instincts stirred despite her determination to conceal her training. She hesitated, weighing the risk of exposure against the possibility of genuine need. "Take me to her," Silas said, already moving toward the stairs. He paused, glancing back at Clara. "I apologize, Miss Dawson. My sister has been ill for several days." Clara stopped herself, then made a swift decision. "I have some experience with fevers, Mr. Boone. If I might be of assistance—" Something like hope flickered in his eyes. Any help would be welcome. The sick room was warm and dimly lit. A young woman lay in a large bed, her blonde hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. Her breathing came in rapid, shallow gasps, and her skin glowed with unnatural heat. Clara set down her bag and approached, her professional demeanor surfacing automatically. "How long has she been ill?" "5 days, Mrs." Wilson answered, wringing a cloth in a basin of water. "Started with a cough, then the fever came yesterday." Clara gently pressed her fingers to Emma's throat, feeling the racing pulse and swollen glands. She examined the girl's eyes, noted the flushed cheeks and the distinctive rash beginning to spread across her chest. "Scarlet fever," Clara said with quiet certainty. "Advanced, but not beyond treatment." Silas watched her intently. "You seem knowledgeable." Clara met his gaze steadily. "I'm a trained nurse. I've treated this before." A moment of silence followed as Silas processed this revelation. Then, pragmatism overrode curiosity. "What do you need?" "Clean cloth, fresh water, willow bark if you have it, vinegar for cooling her." Clara opened her medical bag, her hands finding instruments with practiced ease. "And privacy. I'll need to work quickly." As the others rushed to fulfill her requests, Clara bent over Emma's feverish form. "You'll be all right," she murmured, more to herself than the unconscious girl. "I won't fail this time." Dawn painted the snow-covered landscape in soft pinks and golds as Clara finally allowed herself to sink into a chair beside Emma's bed. The girl's fever had broken an hour earlier, her breathing now deep and regular. Clara's back ached from the night spent in constant vigilance, but satisfaction warmed her more thoroughly than the fire crackling in the hearth. A soft knock preceded Silas's entrance. Dark circles beneath his eyes suggested he'd slept no better than she had. "Mrs. Wilson says you've worked a miracle," he said quietly, approaching his sister's bedside. His fingers brushed Emma's forehead, confirming the coolness there with visible relief. "Not a miracle," Clara replied, professional modesty coloring her tone. "Just proper treatment and care." Silas studied her with new appreciation. "You said you were a nurse. Where did you train?" Clara tensed. The question she'd dreaded. Boston, Massachusetts General Hospital. "That's a fine institution." He sat in the chair opposite her, his gaze direct but not accusatory. "Yet you're traveling alone, nearly penniless, in Wyoming territory." The moment stretched between them, Clara weighing how much truth to offer. Finally she sighed. "There was an incident, a patient. I'm no longer welcome in Boston medical circles." She expected further questions, demands for details she couldn't bear to share. Instead, Silas merely nodded. "Miss Dawson, my ranch employs 40 men who work with dangerous animals and equipment. Accidents are common, and the nearest doctor is in Cheyenne. I don't care what you're running from. I care that you saved my sister's life." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I'd like to offer you a position as the ranch's nurse, room, board, and a fair wage." Clara stared at him, stunned by the unexpected offer of sanctuary. "We're riding into town tomorrow for supplies," he continued. "You'll need proper medical equipment. Consider it an investment in my ranch's future." The morning dawned clear and cold, the blizzard having moved east overnight, leaving Cheyenne accessible once more. Clara adjusted her borrowed cloak, a cast-off from Mrs. Wilson that provided far more warmth than her threadbare coat. The sleigh awaited, Silas already seated with the reins in hand. "No driver today?" Clara asked, accepting his help into the vehicle. "I prefer to handle the team myself when weather permits." He settled the buffalo robe over her lap with casual courtesy. "Besides, gives us a chance to discuss your duties at the ranch without interruption." As they pulled away from the main house, Clara studied the landscape in daylight. Rolling hills stretched toward distant mountains, everything blanketed in pristine white. The isolation struck her anew, a blessing for someone hiding her past, yet potentially dangerous should her medical skills be truly needed. "Your sister is recovering well," Clara said, steering the conversation to safer ground. "The fever shouldn't return, but she'll need rest for at least a week. Emma's always been stubborn about illness." Affection warmed Silas's voice. "Takes after our mother that way." They rode in companionable silence until the outskirts of Cheyenne appeared. Clara tensed involuntarily, her professional mask settling into place. "People will ask questions about a new woman at Boone Ranch," Silas said, noting her change in demeanor. "Especially one working as a nurse. What shall I tell them?" "The truth, as far as it serves." His gaze remained fixed on the road ahead. "You're a trained nurse from Boston, hired to care for ranch workers, and my sister. Your past before Wyoming is your own business." Clara appreciated his discretion, but anxiety still knotted her stomach. "And if someone recognizes me?" Silas's expression hardened slightly. "Then we'll deal with it. Ah, there's Mrs. Montgomery. She fancies herself the medical authority here." Cheyenne's main street bustled with activity after the storm. Shopkeepers clearing snow, wagons navigating slushy ruts, cowboys and townspeople alike taking advantage of the break in weather. Silas guided the sleigh to a hitching post outside the general store, a two-story establishment with Johnson's General Merchandise painted across its false front. As Clara descended, she noticed a well-dressed woman watching from the boardwalk. In her 50s, with silver-streaked hair arranged in an elaborate coiffure, she carried herself with the unmistakable confidence of social authority. The black medical bag in her hand marked her as the Mrs. Montgomery Silas had mentioned. "Mr. Boone," the woman called, approaching with measured steps. "I'm pleased to see you in town. I was concerned about your sister's condition." "Mrs. Montgomery," Silas nodded respectfully. "Emma is much improved, thanks to Miss Dawson's expertise." The older woman's assessing gaze shifted to Clara, who maintained her professional composure despite the scrutiny. "Indeed, and what expertise might that be?" Clara extended her hand. "Clara May Dawson. I trained at Massachusetts General Hospital." "Abigail Montgomery, widow of Dr. James Montgomery." She accepted the handshake briefly. "I've maintained my husband's practice since his passing 3 years ago. We correspond regularly with several Boston institutions." The implied threat wasn't subtle. Clara felt her heart accelerate, but kept her expression neutral. "Massachusetts General is an excellent teaching hospital. And what brings a Boston-trained nurse to our humble territory?" Mrs. Montgomery's smile didn't reach her eyes. Surely the opportunities are greater in civilization. I find frontier medicine more challenging, Clara replied evenly, and Mr. Boone has offered me a position at his ranch. Mrs. Montgomery's eyebrows rose. Has he indeed? How progressive of him. You should know, Mr. Boone, that proper medical care requires proper credentials and experience. Silas stepped forward slightly. Miss Dawson's credentials are satisfactory to me, especially after she successfully treated Emma when no other help was available. Well, Mrs. Montgomery's lips thinned. I do hope your sister's recovery continues. Boston methods can be so experimental at times, not always with favorable outcomes. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. The reference couldn't be coincidental. We should continue our errands, Silas said, placing a protective hand at Clara's elbow. Good day, Mrs. Montgomery. As they entered the store, Clara fought to control her trembling hands. Mrs. Montgomery knew something, or suspected. The question was how much. The general store's crowded interior provided welcome distraction as Silas introduced Clara to Mr. Johnson, the proprietor. While Silas arranged for supplies, Clara examined the limited selection of medical items, bandages, iodine, laudanum, and a few common herbs, woefully inadequate for any serious emergency. Mr. Johnson, do you stock willow bark? She asked, mentally cataloging what she'd need for the ranch. Indeed, Miss Dawson, popular for fevers and such. He directed her to a glass jar containing the dried bark. Mrs. Montgomery usually purchases it for her patients. Clara added it to her growing list, aware of curious glances from other customers. News traveled quickly in small communities, and her arrival with Silas Boone would already be fodder for gossip. A commotion outside drew everyone's attention. Raised voices and a cry of pain sent Clara moving instinctively toward the door, medical instincts overriding caution. On the street, a young man clutched his arm, blood seeping between his fingers where he'd fallen against a wagon's metal edge. A crowd gathered, offering contradictory advice. "Let me through, please," Clara said firmly, adopting the authoritative tone that had served her well in Boston emergency wards. "I'm a nurse." The crowd parted reluctantly. Clara knelt beside the injured man, gently removing his hand to assess the wound, a deep gash requiring immediate attention. "I need clean water and cloth," she instructed, opening her medical bag. Someone hurried to comply as she extracted iodine and suturing materials. Working efficiently, Clara cleaned, disinfected, and stitched the wound with practiced movements. The young man winced, but remained still under her calm direction. "Keep it clean and dry," she instructed when finished. "Change the bandage daily. If redness or swelling develops, seek help immediately." As she packed her supplies, Clara became aware of the impressed murmurs around her. Even more noticeable was Mrs. Montgomery, watching from across the street, her expression calculating. "Perhaps you do know what you're doing, Miss Dawson," an onlooker commented. The journey back to the ranch felt longer than the morning's ride. Clara sat silently beside Silas, the confrontation with Mrs. Montgomery replaying in her mind. The medical supplies they'd purchased filled the back of the sleigh, a generous investment in her position. "She knows something," Clara finally said, unable to contain her anxiety any longer. Silas glanced at her. "Mrs. Montgomery makes it her business to know everything about everyone." "It's more than that." Clara's fingers twisted nervously in her lap. Her comment about Boston methods and experimental treatments, it was too specific. Silas was quiet for a moment, considering. There was a scandal in Boston last year. A nurse who tried an experimental treatment. Patient died. It was in the Eastern papers. Clara's breath caught. Yes. Is that why you left? The direct question demanded truth. Yes. Silas nodded, his expression unreadable. We all have pasts, Miss Dawson. What matters is what you do now. Before Clara could respond, a rider approached from the direction of the ranch, pushing his horse hard through the snow. Silas pulled the sleigh to a halt as the man drew alongside. "Mr. Boone," the ranch hand called, breathless. "It's Jack Harlow. Bad fall from his horse while checking the north fence line. They're bringing him to the house now. It's bad, sir, real bad." The sleigh cut through the snow at dangerous speed, Silas pushing the horses harder than prudence dictated. Clara gripped the side, her mind already cataloging potential injuries from a bad fall, broken bones, internal bleeding, spinal damage, and the limited resources she had to address them. The ranch burst into view, a flurry of activity centered around the main house. 4 men carried an improvised stretcher toward the porch, their grim expressions visible even at a distance. "The dining room," Clara instructed as Silas helped her from the sleigh. "Clear the table. I need space to work." She strode toward the house with purpose, years of emergency ward training taking over. Mrs. Wilson appeared at the door, face pale with concern. "I've put water to boil," the housekeeper said. "Is there anything else?" "Every clean sheet and towel you have," Clara replied, removing her cloak. "Lamps for light. Whiskey if you have it." The dining room transformed rapidly as ranch hands cleared the heavy oak table. Clara opened her medical bag and arranged her instruments, mentally preparing for what awaited her. The newly purchased supplies from town were hastily unpacked. "Jack's the best horseman we have," Silas said, rolling up his sleeves. "If he took a fall, it must have been bad." "Mr. Boone," Clara said, meeting his eyes with professional directness, "I may need your assistance. This won't be pleasant." He nodded gravely. "Whatever you need." The front door burst open, and the men entered with their burden. Jack Harlow's ashen face contorted in pain, his breathing labored. Clara took one look at the unnatural angle of his leg and the blood soaking through his shirt. "Bring him here, now." Jack Harlow was a young man, perhaps 25, with the lean, muscular build of someone who spent his life in the saddle. Now he lay motionless on the dining table, consciousness fading as Clara cut away his blood-soaked clothing with swift, practiced movements. The damage revealed made her breath catch. Compound fracture of the femur, the broken bone having punctured the skin. But far more concerning was the deep wound in his side, where he'd landed on a fence post, splintered wood still embedded in the torn flesh. "What happened?" Clara asked, applying pressure to stem the bleeding. "North fence was down," one of the ranch hands explained. "Jack rode out to check. Horse spooked at something, maybe wolf, threw him onto the broken fence. By the time we found him—" Clara nodded, understanding. Hours had passed. Infection was already a certainty. "I need to extract the splinters and clean the wound," she said, directing the men to hold Jack steady. "Then set the leg. He'll need stitching inside and out." She worked methodically, her hands steady despite the gravity of the situation. The wound in Jack's side revealed fragments of wood buried dangerously deep near vital organs. Traditional treatment would leave them to work their way out naturally, a death sentence in this case. "I need to perform internal debridement," she said quietly to Silas. "It's the only way to remove all the fragments." His eyes widened slightly. "Is that not done routinely?" "It's considered experimental by some." Clara met his gaze steadily. This procedure cost me everything once before, but it's his only chance." Understanding dawned in Silas's eyes. "Do what you must." Clara nodded, sterilizing her instruments in boiling water. "Hold him down. This will—" The door burst open, and Mrs. Montgomery stood framed in the doorway, medical bag in hand. "Step aside, Miss Dawson. I'll take over from here." The room fell silent, save for Jack's labored breathing. Clara straightened, scalpel still in hand, unwilling to yield ground. "Mrs. Montgomery," Silas began, "Miss Dawson has already begun treatment, and I'm ending it," the older woman interrupted, sweeping into the room with authority. "I've been the medical practitioner in this county for 3 years. I know these men and their constitutions." She fixed Clara with a cold stare. "I also know about Boston nurses who think themselves doctors, performing procedures beyond their training. I received correspondence just last month about such a case. The patient died, I believe." Clara felt the room's attention shift, whispers beginning among the ranch hands. Her past had found her faster than she'd feared possible. But a man's life hung in the balance. She couldn't afford pride or shame now. "Mrs. Montgomery," Clara said evenly, "this man has a compound femoral fracture and deep puncture wounds with foreign material embedded near his organs. Without immediate internal debridement, sepsis will develop within hours." "Debridement?" Mrs. Montgomery scoffed. "That technique is experimental at best, reckless at worst. Traditional packing with—" "Will kill him," Clara interrupted firmly. "The fragments are too deep." The women locked eyes in silent battle while Jack moaned, his condition deteriorating by the minute. Clara could see uncertainty flicker across the older woman's face. Perhaps she recognized the severity, but was unwilling to attempt the procedure herself. Silas stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. "Mrs. Montgomery, I respect your position in this community, but this is my ranch, my man dying, and my decision." He gestured to Jack's worsening color. "This man will die while we argue. Either assist Miss Dawson or leave." Mrs. Montgomery's lips thinned to a hard line. "Very well, Mr. Boone, but I warn you, if this man dies under her knife, as that child did in Boston, I will ensure everyone from here to Laramie knows exactly who you've harbored." She gathered her bag and moved toward the door. "I wash my hands of this. May God have mercy on your souls." The door closed behind her with finality. "Now we begin," Clara said quietly, "and pray my hands don't fail him." Hours passed, in a haze of intense concentration. Clara worked with unwavering focus, extracting splinters from Jack's wound, one by one, some barely visible to the naked eye. Her fingers moved with delicate precision, probing tissues swollen with infection, while Silas assisted without complaint, following her terse instructions perfectly. The compound fracture required setting, a brutal process that would have caused unbearable pain had Jack been fully conscious. As it was, his weakened cries during moments of awareness tore at Clara's heart. She administered laudanum sparingly, balancing pain management against the risk of suppressing his already compromised breathing. "Hold this," she instructed Silas, guiding his hands to maintain tension on the splint as she secured the broken leg. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the room's chill. The final wood fragment, buried perilously close to Jack's liver, required all her concentration to extract without causing further damage. Outside, the winter sun set, casting the room in shadows broken only by lamplight. Ranch hands had come and gone, bringing supplies and taking away bloodied water. Mrs. Wilson kept fresh water boiling and clean linens ready. No one questioned Clara's authority now. The gravity of Jack's condition had silenced all doubts. Finally, Clara tied the last suture and straightened, her back screaming in protest after hours bent over her patient. She checked Jack's pulse, weak but steady, and his breathing, which had stabilized. "He'll live," she said simply, the exhaustion hitting her all at once, "if infection doesn't take hold." Silas studied her face, noting the shadows beneath her eyes and the slight tremor in her hands now that the crisis had passed. "You did it." Clara began cleaning her instruments methodically. "The next 24 hours will tell. But yes, I believe so." She managed a tired smile. "Word of this will spread through town by morning." Silas nodded grimly. "I know, and Mrs. Montgomery will ensure everyone hears her version first." 3 days after Jack Harlow's surgery, Clara stood at the edge of Cheyenne's town hall, her borrowed cloak unable to ward off the chill that had nothing to do with Wyoming's winter. The crowded room hummed with whispered conversations that fell silent as she entered, dozens of eyes turning to assess the woman at the center of growing controversy. Silas stood near the front, his tall figure providing a beacon amid the hostile sea of faces. Clara moved toward him with practiced composure, ignoring the pointed whispers that followed her path. "Miss Dawson," he murmured, offering a supportive nod. "Jack continues to improve. No fever since yesterday." Before she could respond, Mayor Ellsworth called the impromptu meeting to order. The silver-haired man cleared his throat importantly, glancing at the document before him. "Citizens of Cheyenne, we're gathered at Mrs. Montgomery's request to address concerns regarding medical practices in our community." His gaze settled uncomfortably on Clara. "Mrs. Montgomery, you have the floor." Abigail Montgomery rose with the confidence of someone accustomed to respect. Her black dress and perfectly arranged hair emphasized her position of authority as she approached the podium. "Thank you, Mayor. I speak today not from personal grievance, but from concern for public safety." She paused dramatically. "For 3 years, I've provided medical care to this community following my husband's standards of practice. Now Mr. Boone has brought among us a woman whose past demands scrutiny." She produced a folded newspaper from her reticule. "I received this from my cousin in Boston. It details the case of Nurse Clara May Dawson, who performed an experimental surgical procedure on a child at Massachusetts General Hospital, a procedure beyond her training and authority. The child died." Gasps filled the room as Mrs. Montgomery's cold gaze found Clara. "This woman killed a patient in Boston with her reckless techniques, and she stands to do the same here unless stopped." The silence that followed felt suffocating. Clara felt every eye in the room boring into her, judging her based on half-truths wielded as weapons. Silas stepped forward, as if to defend her, but Clara placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Is this true, Miss Dawson?" Mayor Ellsworth asked, his expression troubled. Clara straightened her shoulders and stepped forward. The moment she dreaded had arrived. There would be no more running. "Yes," she said, her clear voice carrying through the hushed room. "I did perform that procedure in Boston. I tried to save a dying child with a technique I had seen performed but never officially been trained to do. I failed." She paused, drawing a steadying breath. The child, Elizabeth Harrington, was 8 years old. She had wood fragments embedded near her heart after a carriage accident. Traditional treatment had failed. She was dying of infection while doctors debated proper protocol. I made a choice to try something unorthodox rather than watch her suffer. Clara's gaze swept the room. "I won't apologize for trying to save her life, but I have carried the weight of her death every day since. It's why I left Boston, why I came west. Not to escape responsibility, but to find a place where I might still use my training to help others." Her voice strengthened. I have saved dozens since, including Jack Harlow, using the very procedure that ruined my reputation. Mrs. Montgomery knows this. She saw Jack's wounds. She also knows she lacks the surgical skill to have saved him herself. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Montgomery's face flushed with anger. "You speak beyond your station," she snapped. "A nurse is not a doctor, regardless of what skills you believe you possess." "No," Clara agreed quietly. "I am not a doctor, but I am a trained nurse who did what was necessary to save a man's life when no doctor was available." The town meeting dissolved into heated debate, with citizens taking sides both for and against Clara. Several ranch hands testified to Jack's improving condition, while others expressed concern about experimental methods. Through it all, Clara stood silent, her piece said, her fate now in the community's hands. When she finally returned to Boone Ranch that evening, exhaustion weighed on her like a physical burden. In her room, she methodically began packing her few belongings, movements mechanical and precise. A knock at the door interrupted her preparations. Silas entered at her acknowledgment, his expression grave as he took in the half-packed valise. "So you're running again," he said, not a question, but an observation. Clara folded a chemise with careful attention. "It's for the best. My presence will only create difficulties for you and the ranch. Jack Harlow would be dead without you, and I'll carry that comfort with me." She met his gaze directly. "But we both know Mrs. Montgomery won't rest until I'm gone. The scandal will affect your business, your sister's social standing." "I don't give a damn about any of that," Silas interrupted, uncharacteristic passion breaking through his usual reserve. "Emma is alive because of you. Jack is alive because of you. How many others might live if you stay?" Clara's hands stilled on her packing. "You don't understand what it's like, having your worst mistake follow you everywhere. The whispers, the judgment, your past doesn't define you, Clara. Not to me." The use of her given name startled her. Silas moved closer, his voice softening. "We all make mistakes. It's what we do afterward that matters." Clara opened her mouth to respond when hurried footsteps sounded in the hallway. Mrs. Wilson appeared at the door, breathless and wide-eyed. "Mr. Boone, a message just arrived from town. Mrs. Montgomery's niece has fallen gravely ill with the same symptoms as Elizabeth Harrington. She's asking for Miss Dawson." Dawn painted the horizon with streaks of pink and gold as Clara prepared to leave for town. She had spent the night gathering supplies, mentally reviewing the case that had ruined her career. Catherine Montgomery, Mrs. Montgomery's 12-year-old niece, reportedly suffered from the same condition that had taken Elizabeth Harrington's life: wood fragments near vital organs following an accident, now progressing to infection. Clara secured her medical bag, the weight familiar and grounding. Despite her history with Mrs. Montgomery, she couldn't refuse a child in need. As she descended the stairs, she found the main room filled with unexpected faces. Doc Wilson, the elderly physician who occasionally traveled through outlying ranches, stood conversing with Silas. Beside him, Jack Harlow sat in a chair, pale but decidedly alive, his splinted leg extended before him. "Miss Dawson," Jack called, attempting to rise before Clara gestured for him to remain seated. "Wanted to thank you proper before you headed out." "Mr. Harlow should still be in bed," Clara admonished, though she couldn't help but smile at this evidence of her successful treatment. "Told him the same," Doc Wilson said, extending his hand to Clara. "Sam Wilson. Been doctoring these parts for 30 years. Wanted to meet the nurse who performed surgical debridement in a ranch dining room." Clara accepted his handshake cautiously. "You're not here to condemn the procedure?" The old doctor chuckled, his white beard quivering. "Condemn it? I've been trying to learn it myself. These cowboys are always getting themselves punctured by something or other." His expression grew serious. "I've watched Miss Dawson work. She knows more than most doctors I've met." Other recovered patients had gathered too. Emma Boone, the ranch hand whose arm Clara had stitched in town, a young mother whose baby Clara had delivered 2 weeks prior. All offered testimonials of her skill and care. "We thought you might need supporters," Silas explained. "The Montgomery influence runs deep in Cheyenne." The Montgomery residence stood at the respectable end of Cheyenne's main street, a 2-story clapboard house with ornate trim and curtained windows. Clara approached the front door with Silas and Doc Wilson flanking her, a small delegation of support against what awaited inside. Mrs. Montgomery herself answered their knock, her expression a mixture of relief and resentment. Dark circles beneath her eyes testified to a sleepless night. "You came," she said simply, her usual hauteur diminished by worry. "I did," Clara replied. "How is Catherine?" "Worsening, this way." The older woman led them through a parlor filled with Eastern furniture and medical texts, remnants of her late husband's practice. Catherine lay in a bedroom upstairs, her young face flushed with fever, breathing labored. Clara approached immediately, setting down her bag and beginning her examination with practiced efficiency. "What happened?" she asked, gently probing the wound on the girl's side. "She was helping decorate the church for the winter social," Mrs. Montgomery explained, hovering anxiously. The ladder collapsed. She fell onto the nativity display. The wooden manger splintered beneath her. Clara nodded, recognizing the parallels to Elizabeth Harrington's case immediately. She carefully lifted the dressing Mrs. Montgomery had applied, revealing angry red skin and purulent drainage. "How long ago?" 3 days. I treated it traditionally, cleaning, packing with carbolic-soaked gauze. But the fever began yesterday, and this morning she became delirious." Clara met the older woman's gaze directly. "The splinters have fragmented. They're too deep for surface treatment." She took a steadying breath. "She needs the same procedure I performed on Jack Harlow." Mrs. Montgomery's lips thinned, professional pride warring with a guardian's desperation. "I despise what you represent, Miss Dawson, but save her if you can." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "She's all the family I have left." The next hour passed in tense preparation. Mrs. Montgomery's parlor transformed into a makeshift operating theater, more sophisticated than the ranch dining room, but still primitive by hospital standards. Clara arranged her instruments on a clean cloth, sterilizing them methodically in boiling water. "I'll need your assistance," she told Mrs. Montgomery, who nodded stiffly. "Your hands are steadier than most, and you know basic surgical principles." "I assisted my husband for 15 years, the older woman replied. "I know more than basic principles." Clara acknowledged this with a nod. "Then you understand the risks and why this procedure is necessary." Mrs. Montgomery's professional demeanor faltered momentarily. "What happened with the Harrington girl? Truly?" Clara's hands stilled over her instruments. "She was further gone than Catherine is now. The infection had already spread to her bloodstream. I attempted the debridement too late." She met the older woman's eyes directly. "I've replayed that day 1,000 times, questioning every decision. I should have acted sooner, should have fought harder to convince the attending physician." Understanding passed between the women, the weight of lives in their hands, the burden of decisions made and paths not taken. "We both want her to live," Clara said softly. "Follow my instructions exactly." Mrs. Montgomery nodded, rolling up her sleeves and washing her hands in the carbolic solution Clara had prepared. They worked together with unexpected synchronicity, Mrs. Montgomery proving herself a capable assistant despite her earlier hostility. Her knowledge of anatomy complemented Clara's surgical technique as they located and extracted the wood fragments one by one. "There," Clara murmured, extracting a splinter perilously close to Catherine's liver. "That's the last I can see. Now we irrigate the wound thoroughly." As they completed the procedure, Clara felt a familiar tension, the same point where Elizabeth Harrington's case had turned fatal. "It's time," Clara said quietly. "This is where I failed before." Morning light filtered through lace curtains as Clara made the final preparations for Catherine's recovery. The critical phase of the procedure had passed successfully during the night. Unlike Elizabeth Harrington, whose infection had already spread too far, Catherine had responded to treatment. Her fever had broken an hour before dawn, her breathing eased to normal rhythm. Clara checked the girl's pulse once more, steady and strong. The wound remained clean, the careful sutures holding the delicate tissues together. She adjusted the bandages with gentle precision, Mrs. Montgomery watching intently from the other side of the bed. "I've learned from my mistake," Clara explained as she worked. "With Elizabeth, the dosage of carbolic acid was too strong. It damaged the surrounding tissue, creating more harm than good. And I waited too long to attempt the procedure." She secured the bandage with practiced efficiency. "The technique was sound, but my judgment was flawed by inexperience." Mrs. Montgomery nodded slowly, professional understanding tempering her earlier hostility. "Many good doctors have lost patients learning such lessons." "I'm not a doctor," Clara reminded her softly. "No," the older woman conceded, "but perhaps you should have been." She studied Clara with new respect. "Women are not permitted in medical colleges, but your hands have the skill for it." Clara felt an unexpected warmth at this acknowledgment from her former adversary. "My father was a surgeon. He taught me what he could, though he never imagined I'd practice independently." They fell into companionable silence, both watching Catherine's peaceful sleep. Outside, Cheyenne was awakening to another winter day, unaware of the small miracle that had occurred in the Montgomery household. Not just a life saved, but a bridge built between unlikely allies. "She'll need monitoring," Clara said finally. "The next 24 hours remain critical, though I believe the worst has passed." Mrs. Montgomery straightened her shoulders, professional dignity returning. "I can manage from here. You should rest." She hesitated, then added with visible effort, "Thank you, Miss Dawson. Your skill is considerable." Coming from Abigail Montgomery, it was the highest praise Clara could have hoped for. Clara descended the stairs slowly, exhaustion making her movements deliberate. She had not slept in nearly 30 hours, and the emotional strain of performing the procedure that had once destroyed her career had taken its toll. In the Montgomery parlor, she found Doc Wilson dozing in an armchair, while Silas stood at the window, watching the street come to life. He turned at her entrance, concern evident in his expression. "How is she?" "She'll recover," Clara said, relief evident in her voice. "Barring complications, she should make a full recovery." Doc Wilson stirred, blinking away sleep. "You performed the debridement successfully?" Clara nodded, sinking gratefully into a chair. "Mrs. Montgomery assisted. She has considerable skill herself." "James Montgomery was a fine doctor," Wilson observed. "Taught her well, though he'd never admit a woman could learn medicine properly." He chuckled softly. "Territorial Medical Board would have fits if they knew a widow and a disgraced nurse were performing surgery in Cheyenne." "Speaking of which," Silas interjected, "what happens now? Will Mrs. Montgomery continue her campaign against you?" Clara considered this, recalling the respect in the older woman's eyes. I don't think so. Professional rivalry will remain, but I believe we've reached an understanding. Doc Wilson nodded approvingly. Territory needs all the medical help it can get. Too many miles between proper doctors. He fixed Clara with an appraising look. Been thinking of taking on an assistant, someone with surgical experience. Clara's eyes widened at the implication. A legitimate position, a chance to practice openly. Before she could respond, Mrs. Montgomery appeared in the doorway. Her rigid posture had softened slightly, exhaustion evident in the lines of her face. Silas Boone is waiting outside, she announced to Clara. He hasn't left since you arrived. A hint of a smile touched her lips. Rather devoted for an employer, wouldn't you say? The journey back to Boone Ranch felt different. The landscape transformed not by weather, but by Clara's changing perspective. Beside her, Silas handled the reins with easy confidence, allowing her the silence she needed to process the night's events. Spring's first tentative warmth had begun to melt the snow in patches, revealing the dormant prairie beneath. Doc Wilson offered me a position as his assistant, Clara said finally, watching Silas's profile for his reaction. Will you take it? His voice remained neutral, though his hands tightened slightly on the reins. I'm considering it. Clara smoothed her skirts thoughtfully. It would provide legitimacy, a chance to practice openly under proper supervision. Silas nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The ranch would miss your services. I've been thinking about that too. Newfound confidence allowed Clara to speak freely. Wyoming Territory has no medical facilities outside Cheyenne, and even those are inadequate. Ranch accidents, childbirth complications, childhood illnesses, all treated haphazardly or not at all. She turned toward him, animation lighting her features. I'm thinking of establishing a proper hospital here, and a nursing school. Women from the territory could train in basic medical care, then return to their communities better prepared for emergencies. Silas glanced at her, surprise and admiration evident in his expression. That's ambitious. Perhaps, Clara acknowledged, but necessary and possible with the right support. The sleigh crested a hill, revealing Boone Ranch spread below them. No longer a temporary refuge, but a place of possibility. Clara saw it with new eyes. The main house could accommodate patient rooms, the unused barn converted to classrooms, the surrounding land perfect for expansion. It would require investment, Silas observed, though his tone suggested consideration rather than dismissal, and influence with the territorial government. Both things you possess in abundance, Mr. Boone. He smiled then, the first genuine smile she had seen from him. Silas, please. After saving my sister, my ranch hand, and now establishing professional peace with Mrs. Montgomery, I believe we're past formalities. The sleigh approached the ranch, its occupants silent in comfortable contemplation until Silas spoke again, his voice carrying unexpected weight. I'd be honored if you'd consider building that future here, with me. Clara turned to him, seeing in his eyes the promise of not just professional partnership, but something deeper, a second chance at life, at purpose, perhaps even at love. I believe I would like that very much, she replied softly, as the Wyoming sun bathed them both in the light of new beginnings. The Wyoming winter has softened into spring as we reach the end of Clara and Silas's journey. If you're feeling a touch of that frontier dust in your eyes, after traveling alongside a disgraced nurse who found redemption in the most unlikely place, know that you're not alone. Clara's story of courage amid shame, of professional dedication in the face of scandal, has left its mark on me as well. There's something about the frontier that strips away pretense and reveals our true character. Clara arrived in Wyoming territory with nothing but her medical bag and the weight of past failure. She believed one tragic mistake had defined her forever. But redemption isn't about escaping our past. It's about finding the courage to use even our failures as stepping stones toward a better future. Clara didn't run from her controversial procedure. She perfected it, ultimately saving lives that conventional medicine couldn't touch. What resonated most deeply as Clara's story unfolded was how isolation nearly destroyed her, while connection restored her. We aren't meant to carry our burdens alone, especially the burden of past mistakes. Silas, Emma, Jack, and even Mrs. Montgomery. They didn't just need Clara's medical skills. They offered her something she'd lost: purpose, respect, and eventually, love. Sometimes the very people we strive to heal end up healing parts of ourselves we thought beyond repair. Frontier medicine might seem distant from our modern lives, but the courage it required remains timeless. We all face moments when professional ethics clash with institutional rules, when doing right means risking everything we've built. Clara's Wyoming may be historical, but her struggle to trust her training when others doubted her worth echoes in every workplace and relationship where we must stand by our convictions despite opposition. In the end, Clara learned what the frontier has always taught those brave enough to listen. We are not defined by our worst moments, but by what we do after them. Second chances aren't simply given. They're built, one healing touch at a time. Thank you for traveling this snowy trail with Clara and Silas. Stories only truly live when they find readers willing to invest their hearts in flawed characters trying to become better. Your willingness to follow a disgraced nurse from that blizzard-swept train station to her frontier hospital dream is what transforms mere words into something that matters. Clara's journey got me thinking about moments when we must choose between safe obscurity and risky authenticity. We all carry professional or personal setbacks that tempt us to hide our gifts rather than risk failure again. What's a time when you had to overcome past disappointment to offer your unique skills to others? Share your story of second chances in the comments, because genuine healing deserves to be honored, whether in frontier medicine or in your own modern challenges. If Clara and Silas's path to redemption and love touched something in your heart, I'd be grateful if you'd hit that like button and consider subscribing. The American frontier is rich with stories of women who defied convention to heal bodies and hearts, and I'd be honored to share more of them with you. Until next time, may your hands be skilled and your heart remain tender in the face of life's inevitable wounds.